Yeah, today I'm just going to very briefly talk about Namada, what Namada does, why it exists, sort of how it helps with how it is the shielded asset hub or one of the shielded asset hubs in the Interchain ecosystem. But to start off, I'd actually like to go through why. Like, why do we care about privacy guarantees very fundamentally, right? Like, historically, we've done fine. I don't know, Bitcoin has been around for a while and we still haven't had reasonable privacy guarantees deployed at large scales. So yeah, I think it's important to think about why do we actually care about sort of personal privacy guarantees. And I really think about this as the fundamental thing is it's privacy for national defense. And privacy for individual defense. It's the ability to not have everyone read your data is going to be important. So when you think about this from a nation state, right, like what is the easiest way to get all blockchains shut down tomorrow or in 2 days? I think if we move global finance onto transparent chains, sort of on day one, everyone would be like, ooh, interesting experiment. And on day two, every government would be like, yeah, we've got to kill this internet thing. Like, this is clearly a bad idea that everyone can read that, like, we keep leaking our citizens' financial data to North Korea. Like, this is fundamentally, it's a bad idea, right? Like, long-term, structurally, this will never work that all of global finance is going to be fully transparent, not only because governments don't like it, individual companies don't like it. My parents will never adopt a system in which sort of their neighbors end up seeing whether they went to the hospital, how much salary they're receiving, what's their sort of rental income, right? Like these kind of very basic things, I think, is what we're forgetting when we think of like, well, do people really want privacy? And I think like long term, people will fundamentally want privacy. This is different right now, right? Like if we are okay with living in a world that's mostly about shitcoin trading, it's probably going to be fine. We don't actually need privacy guarantees if sort of the biggest impact this space has in like building decentralized casinos around sort of meme coins, right? Then we don't need privacy guarantees. But I think for anything that sort of touches the real world, that actually represents real world economic flows, we will need privacy guarantees. And I'd like to start off with this by saying that I think we should reframe privacy. It is not, I'm hiding something from someone. It is, we are restoring the freedom to reveal. We are normally, it is a very conscious act to reveal data to other people. Sort of like in most human interactions, you always have a choice to reveal. In sort of the current system or era of transparent systems, we actually don't have, like the default has changed. The default is from this like, oh, I have the optionality to reveal my data to other people. It has changed to, well, now I've got to do a lot of extra work and like justify myself to sort of obtain the guarantees that that my data remains private, right? And so when I think the biggest thing that actually has hindered sort of the large-scale adoption of a lot of these privacy-preserving systems, whether it's Bzcash, Penumbra, Monero, right? Like, is people think of this not as sort of giving them back the same thing that they currently have, as in giving back people the freedom to reveal. Plus, I think people phrase this as like a very offensive act, where it's like, oh, it's me against my local community. Like, I want to hide something from my local community. Like, so everyone in this room, like when you talk to people about privacy, talk to them about the freedom to reveal, as well as privacy for national defense, because I think this really fundamentally matters that when we think about the discourse here, that we think about freedom to reveal as well as privacy for national defense, and not like, oh, I'm trying to like cheat on my taxes. Because while some people may use those tools, right, like this can never be avoided, I honestly believe this is not the majority of the use case. Like the majority of the use cases, my parents don't want to reveal to their neighbors their salary. Like to me, this is the majority of like what Namada is trying to achieve. Yeah, so let's quickly go through why this is challenging. And actually, I'd like to start here with a sort of quick question or a couple of questions. What do you currently do with, actually, let's start off with, who here regularly uses crypto? Like once a week? All right, everyone who isn't raising their hands, you should consider your choices. You're probably in the wrong rooms, right? Like, who here uses more complex things rather than just like simple transfers, like complex, as in like you are on osmosis, you are doing something just besides just sending money around or trading it. Okay, centralized exchange. Cool, this is still a large part. Who here actually cares about privacy? Like, who thinks about this when they interact on these systems? Like, okay, that's the rest. Again, you're revealing your data forever. It's not like, oh, tomorrow the data is gone. No, it's like, if you paid a hospital bill with this, that bill payment is still going to be around in 200 years, which is also fundamentally different than existing systems. Like in existing systems, we sort of have automatic expiry on a lot of the things we do. With blockchains, we don't, right? Like these records are forever. So you should be very careful to what you actually use for privacy guarantees. Who here uses centralized exchanges as mixers? Great, yes. If you have a choice right now, sort of like the most liquid place to go is any centralized exchange. And centralized exchanges are actually the definition of mixers. Like where things like the Penumbra circuits, the Zcash circuits, those aren't actually mixing, right? Like you always custody your own tokens. Centralized exchanges are the like picture book definition of a centralized mixer. And like honestly, right now, you should probably use those. But hopefully over time in the ecosystem, we can start changing this. Yes, I mentioned this. Why is this challenging? Everything you do on chain is visible for everyone, is visible for everyone, forever. There we go. The other interesting thing I think that, especially in the early days, no one really thought about is people want tokens. People want financial assets to play with. They do not care about blockchains, right? And this is to say that we need to provide asset-agnostic abstractions that can sort of like work with the assets that get created in the next 5 years or so. It cannot be the model that we must build shielded sets or shielding tools or sort of like circuit tools into every new deployment, right? Like we're currently living in this interesting era where there's thousands of new assets being created on a daily basis, and ideally you want to have some model where all these assets inherit the guarantees of the past, like where you have a couple of large shielded sets, and if like a new coin comes up tomorrow, that new coin directly interoperates with sort of the existing tooling. And one of the other large parts is like why it's challenging. It's historically too expensive, too complicated. Who here actually used Zcash around like 2017? Ah, you missed out. It was great. It only worked on Linux. You had to sync a full node. There was no UI. If you wanted to get shielded transfers working on Linux, working with Zcash, you had to download the node, then run the proof. It took about 5 to 6 minutes to generate a single transfer proof on a reasonable laptop. This is historic, though. It was historically very expensive and super slow, as well as it was very complicated. This is getting rapidly better. Like with Namada, it takes, I don't know, on a laptop, you can generate a proof in a couple of seconds. On a phone, it will be sort of in the order of tens of seconds. With Penumbra, for example, like you get fully private RPC calls, like where you have local data indexing, right? Like the tooling is getting rapidly better. And as a result, there's really no excuse anymore why systems aren't thinking about this. Cool, yeah. So, very briefly, what is Namada? Namada is the shielded asset hub. It is Namada does one thing and it tries to do nothing else. It just tries to do shielding of assets. It just does shielded transfers in an asset-agnostic fashion for the interchain stack, right? Like this is IBC enabled, so any IBC compatible asset can flow into Namada. You can use it in a single shielded set, and then it can flow out again. It tries to do nothing else. Namada is very dumb and simple, actually, to some extent. But I think this is, especially in the early days of actually getting consumer adoption here and like actually having people try this out and integrate this into their tech stacks, I think being very dumb and simple is a massive feature, not a bug, because if you end up in a world where you try to do too many things at the same time, it is very likely that people won't bother adopting something because it's overwhelming, right? So Namada is very simple. It's just the shielded asset hub. So you can shield any IBC asset, and this also applies to NFTs. And again, I think this is an underappreciated sort of facet of why you need unified shielded sets, which is we may have, very likely, we live in a world where there's lots of volume in low value assets, and we want, for example, coffee payments, right? But we want to have the ability for sort of NFT transfers, like large scale things that may be quite expensive but happen very rarely, to inherit the same privacy guarantees. And so you can shield any IBC asset, and that means that an external observer cannot tell the specific asset that you're interacting with, right? Like they can tell that you're interacting with a shielded set. They do not know whether, you have the freedom to reveal, but like the external observer doesn't automatically get the right to see whether you're like sending some atom around or you're sending a bad kit around. Like that is like what specific asset type you're moving around is actually shielded here. So imagine that we actually at some point represented houses on the blockchain. You could move a house into the shielded set, sell to someone else. And there will be questions around this. Of course, if you tell everyone on Twitter that you still own the house, this did nothing for you. This is more like, think about also your interactions on like, with like unique things. If you tell everyone that you still own the unique thing, like privacy is not going to help you, but especially with like fungible token transfers, this helps a lot. The other cool thing which I'll talk a little bit about here in a bit is with Namada you can be rewarded for protecting your data. So Namada has shielded set rewards which effectively allow the community to decide what type of assets receive extra rewards in order sort of to provide a more cohesive privacy set or shielding set. So yeah, Namada is your gateway to the shielded interchain. This is really, you can use as a developer Namada to build really cool things. You can build shielded swaps with osmosis, right? Like a lot of, I mean, this is I think to a large extent the beauty of the Cosmos ecosystem and the Cosmos stack, that we can start sort of composing via IBC, and like different chains can focus on offering different things. And so with Namada, you can now think about shielded swaps. You could think about shielded liquid restaking. So generally shielded actions, like the floor is yours to some extent on like what does the community, what do developers actually want to do in terms of implementing shielded actions in the real world. Yeah, you can shield your interactions, you can shield arbitrary messages, because really nodes in a shielded set are just arbitrary messages. It just happens that some of these arbitrary messages have semantics assigned to them by us, that they represent financial assets. There's like nothing inherently different between saying like this is a Bitcoin string and this is an actual message, so you can just shield arbitrary messages, generally in the interchain. So towards the end, I'd actually quickly like to go through the TLDR because I'm actually starting to run low on time. So why do we care? Well, we care about having we care about this because we want to provide the same basic guarantees that currently everyone has. Like we effectively just want to put the blockchain ecosystems on par with what's actually available in reality at the moment. Because when you really fundamentally think about it, any bank account is actually reasonably private, at least to sort of the large-scale outside world. What we've been building with digital systems here is actually significantly worse than the real world, right? Like in the real world, my parents never worry that everyone sees their financial history. If they started using blockchains, they would immediately have to start worrying about this. So it's really about restoring the freedom to reveal and not adding something new to it. It's more like giving you back what you already had before. Why is it challenging overall? Well, everything is on-chain and is visible to everyone forever. Really carefully consider your actual models here of like what are you using these systems for at the moment, because especially like if you're an at-risk group, remember this is forever. This will be around forever. Yeah, people want tokens, so like not blockchains. Generally, people don't really care about the tech stacks they're working with. They're like, people care about two things. They care about sort of the assets that they hold, as well as the security as well as the security of the system that they're currently on. And it is not too expensive anymore, and it's not too complicated. But we was on this earlier panel on sort of ZK acceleration, and it's like, yeah, like all this ZK tech keeps leaping ahead rather than like trying to solve a very simple use case. So like we got like, oh, we're going to have full ZK EVM rollups everywhere. We can't even like have large-scale adoption of like very simple transfers, right? Like, so let's focus on like solving the simple use cases using this very cool technology before we go like, well, this also will like make the moon green. Yeah, roughly, what is Namada? It's a shielded asset hub. It allows you to shield any IBC asset. Over time, there can also be a sort of story on like how do we, from the Cosmos ecosystem, want to bridge to the outside world. Hopefully, we should be thinking about implementing IBC also for Ethereum, right? Like, how do you get interoperability and IBC deployed on systems outside of sort of tenement-based chains to a large extent? Some people are doing cool things there, but it'd still be like Axelar, right? Like, getting some amount of sort of like compatibility in the rest of the blockchain ecosystem would be quite nice. Yeah, you can also be rewarded for protecting your data, and I'll talk about this in a sec. And generally speaking, you can think of Namada as the gateway to the shielded interchain. There we go. Yeah, what's next? So the release candidate for Namada, I think, was cut a couple of days ago. So now the block party can start. I really don't know what the timelines are. There will be a Genesis block. There's a release candidate. If the validators, if the community feels ready to start standing up the network, they can go ahead, right? Like Namada is fundamentally, it's a fully decentralized thing. And I think, again, we've kind of lost our ethos a lot in the space where we're kind of okay with all these rollups, which are effectively single server databases. Namada is actually just fully decentralized. Whenever the community feels ready to stand up the chain, they can. So like on the latest shielded expedition, which was I was just listening to an earlier talk. I spoke about, like, it was running like 3 months ago. We had 144,000 actually pilots or accounts, as well as around 200 validators. So really, this is now, the timeline is, I hope in the next couple of weeks, do the validators and the community actually stand up the chain. And then Namada comes with nothing enabled. So the release candidate supports all the future feature sets of like full Namada, but it comes with nothing enabled by default, except proof of stake as well as governance. And so after the block party, it will start being down to, again, the community via governance vote to decide, do we want to enable staking rewards? Do we want to enable public goods funding? And this is sort of my idea of like in which order I think it's probably a good idea to start enabling some of these features. Again, you can do other things. Like if you're involved in the community, make your voice heard. There's, by the way, a great forum where the main and Genesis parameters have been discussed very actively in the last month or two. And I think there's now rough consensus around like what the main and Genesis parameters, like block times, should look like. After we do the staking party, I would recommend that we do the shielding party, which pretty much just means enabling IBC asset transfers as well as allowing assets to be shielded. This really follows a roadmap of like how do we get to a stable mainnet over time. And then afterwards is actually turning on rewards, so enabling shielded set rewards, incentivizing different assets, whether this be Noble USDC or Atom or Osmo, to flow into the shielded set to like bootstrap an initial set of sort of like that the shielded set has some amount. And importantly, the shielded set doesn't actually require liquidity in the sense that everyone in DeFi keeps thinking about liquidity. It just helps to protect assets at rest. There's no sort of liquidity requirement because it's not an active market, right? Namada does something very dumb and very simple, which is it just provides uniform privacy or shielding guarantees, privacy guarantees for any arbitrary asset. And then, actually, I think as the last step, and in my mind, this process can easily take a couple of weeks to sort of a few months. The last step should probably be activating actual NAM transfers, because fundamentally, the entire system relies on sort of it being stable, and I think before enabling native asset transfers, it's a good idea that we've tested out everything, that everything works correctly. The other thing that's actually not mentioned here is IBC asset transfers also can be rate limited, and I think anyone that's not doing rate limits over IBC is a fool. So I would suggest to sort of start with relatively small IBC rate limits and then increase them over time. Just because it's kind of difficult to fix things if they go wrong over IBC. Yeah, in the end, it's all about joining the Namada community, being involved in sort of shielding tech, being involved in privacy-preserving technologies, and it's all about restoring the freedom to reveal. Please find Twitter, Discord, there's a bunch of specs out there, and if you have questions, please find me out afterwards. Thank you very much. Perfect. Yes, I think I may have time for one question. All right, no questions. Perfect. Oh, wait, what's that question?
I guess curious around like this very transactions, like defining crypto transactions, about like people's like actual digital identity and how does that relate to shielding and things?
Yeah. So the question was, how does this kind of asset transfer system relate to shielding digital identity? I think again, sort of going back to let's learn to walk before we run. Let's like start with a very simple, understood use case. I think any identity system that doesn't have good privacy guarantees is doomed to fail because they're just going to get abused. It'd be cool to see someone build shielded identity using Namada, so like in the sense of shielded actions, moving, like representing your identity as some form of NFT that you can move into the system and back out. There's also a couple of cool guys here from distributed labs that are doing very interesting zero knowledge proofs over passports. So I'll like find them later if you think about like privacy preserving identity. Yeah, thank you. Cool, perfect. Thank you very much.